We apologize for the delayed start. We're having some technical issues with a different video conferencing platform, but we've switched now to Zoom and are off to the races. I'm Steve Grove, Commissioner of Deed. Thanks for joining us. We have a couple of slides to present, but given we had to cut this presentation by 15 minutes, given the technical shift, we're going to be pretty quick with the slides today. And so we'll just kind of remind ourselves of what the governor announced on Friday as it relates to this dial forward, which we're really excited about, and then we'll take as much time as we possibly can for questions. So with that in mind, I'm just going to turn it straight over to my colleague, Assistant Commissioner Dan Huff, the Department of Health, who's going to walk through just the basics of the dial forwards that were released Friday, many of which went into effect today. And then we'll have a few other comments from our team here in state government before taking your questions. So Dan, over to you, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, everyone. Our social gatherings, outdoor gatherings, have been moved to 50 people, and indoor gatherings are at 15 people. The previous household cap has been lifted, so you can have multiple households as long as you don't over that capacity. Religious services and celebration, there is now no capacity limits. Social distancing, masking, those measures stay in place. Next slide, please. Okay, restaurants, we are moving up to 75% capacity. That's 250 people max. The 11 p.m. Curfew stays in effect, or closing at 11 p.m. stays in effect. You may now have up to 4 people seated at a bar. Table seating remains at 6 people per table. Personal services such as your salon, hair salon, barbers, etc. No capacity limit, but social distancing and masking is still required. Our gyms and fitness centers are now at 50% capacity. Indoor classes are capped still at 25, but outdoor classes may increase to 50 people. SD6 and masking still required. Entertainment venues are now at 50% capacity. And I'll explain in a minute about very large venues, those that would exceed, say, a 500 person capacity. But this is your movie theaters, your bowling alleys, et cetera. Again, social distancing and masking is required, as well as seated while being served food. Next slide. So we're continuing to be more active. And I'd like to turn it over to my colleague now, Laura Olivan, who will walk us through exactly how does this larger capacity work for venues that are over 500 people. Laura?
Great, thank you, Assistant Commissioner Huff. So starting April 1st, we will allow for expanded seating. And you can see the equations here. It will depend, your exact seating will depend upon whether you're indoors or outdoors, and whether your event is a seated or a non-seated event. And the numbers get larger depending upon the situation. Because the math on this can get a little bit complicated, we have created a calculator. If I think the next slide is the calculator. Great. So let's walk you quickly through this. Let's say you have an outdoor event and it is seated. So then you click seated, and this can be found on our Stay Safe. Now, then you have the choice. Does your venue have an occupancy rating? If it does, and that's the one we'll click on this. That means you know what occupancy you're at. Let's say it's 40,000. Obviously, I'm giving an example right now of a really large setting. Then you just push the button and it will give you your occupancy. And in this case, it's 10,000. And that's about what the Twins will have as their opener. So if you can't understand the calculations in our guidance or don't want to do the math, this is a really easy source for you to be able to calculate your occupancy in any situation. Thank you. And then I think we can return to Dan's summary. Which means next slide. Yeah, great.
Thank you. Next slide then, please. Thank you, Laura. So the work from home requirement, that is that everyone that can work from home must work from home, has been lifted. However, we do strongly recommend that folks who can work from home still do work from home. And it is important that employers remember that they must accommodate those who have any ADA type requirement based upon the COVID pandemic, where they would need to be able to work from home. We also then just strongly encourage you to work with your employees. We know that people have many different circumstances. Some people may be caring for, being a caretaker for others during this time. So we ask that you accommodate all of your employees. That will just allow this to be much more successful as we continue to go through this. I will add that the state of Minnesota, we are not going to bring additional employees back. In the health department, I will continue to work in my bedroom. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right. And Commissioner Grove, I believe I turn this back over to you. Is that correct?
Yeah, thanks, Assistant Commissioner Huff, and really want to be quick with the guidelines to take your questions. So, on the whole here, I'd just say to wrap up on the preamble, we're eager to make these changes, the first of which go into effect today. And as the governor said, as numbers continue to hold steady and the vaccinations improve, he wants to be up there dialing for it as often as possible in the coming weeks ahead. So more to come, we hope. And I'll turn over to Jen Gates to moderate our Q&A, and eager to hear thoughts and questions that you have.
Great. It seems like the first question is, sorry, just scrolling up a second. If a business wanted to request an on-site vaccination clinic, are there guidelines or requirements if a business is interested in having that for their employees? Or is it limited to big corporations or businesses rather than maybe, for example, a small town grocery store?
Well, there is an employer toolkit that was just launched today, and I believe you should all be on the note that I sent out earlier today. The Department of Health has launched. Happy to have anybody from health answer this who would like, but I'd say broadly speaking, the team is looking at what comes in to determine what might make sense, and issues around scale and accessibility are really important. But I'd say if you're an employer who thinks you might be a good fit or want to do something like that because you think you'd be able to reach your employees more effectively and efficiently, sign up, because there are folks on that team who are monitoring all the incoming regularly and can get back to you immediately with some additional questions and figure out whether it makes sense to host something on site or simply get your employees to the nearest possible pharmacy or other clinic to get vaccinated.
Thanks, Commissioner. This next question is for Laura. What is the capacity for indoor banquets?
So in a big change, we're eliminating the party celebration guidance. So now your event, you just refer to the entertainment venue guidance. And if it is a standing event where people will be moving around, and say with a cocktail party, and it's indoors, it would be a max of 1,500 at 10% of the capacity. Or if it's a seated, exclusively seated event, it would be up to 3,000 at 15% capacity after April 1st.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay, the next question is regarding the standing social hour that is typical at weddings and fundraiser events where appetizers and bar service is served outside the room prior to a seated dinner inside the room. The guidance appears that food and beverage will have the requirement of being seated only. How must this social hour be handled to remain compliant with the new rules?
If Ben Wood is on the line, I'd like to get some help answering that question.
I can. Basically, the standing requirement is anytime people are going to be drinking or eating food or beverage, they have to be sitting down. So you can certainly provide your social hour. It's just going to look a little bit differently now because in order for people to eat or consume their beverage and all that stuff, they have to have a place to sit. So otherwise, the capacity restrictions are all congruent with whatever the venue is.
And then to build upon that, that event actually can be standing, but if people at the point of time where people are drinking, so you can still have a reception and movement, but if at the point where they're drinking and eating, they do have to be seated, and that's a special safeguard.
Great. The next question is, if you are doing a business expo in a sports venue, a gym, what is the capacity? The event would have businesses at booths, and the public walking through.
So it is not operating as a gym, but it's operating as a venue. So that would be, up until April 1st, it would be 50% to 50 after April 1st. That sounds to me like an indoor standing meeting. So that would be up to 1,500 at 10%. But if there's any gym activity, then that answer is modified, if I'm understanding that question correctly.
Okay. Is there any way to calculate for venues that have partial seating and partial standing room only?
We are getting ready to issue some guidance for the more complex situations where you have combined standing and seated event. And I think you can expect that in the next day or two. That is also true for venues that have a combined outdoor and indoor, since that's kind of a complex calculation and may also involve standing seating. We're going to issue additional detailed guidance, and then we will push that out as soon as it's public.
Great. Looks like that answers the next question. So we will go to this one. Please provide more detail on groups of 6 attending an event and are not required to maintain 6 feet of social distancing. Do they need to be from the same household? Do they need to arrive together? Or can they come in separate modes of transportation meeting at the event sites?
Okay. So up until now, if you were out going to an event, let's use the Twins opener, you would only be able to sit, for example, with your own household. We have modified that requirement. So now you can go to a venue and sit together without social distancing in groups of up to 6. Now, in that example, you're still wearing masks, but we want to provide the additional flexibility so you didn't only have to go with your household. Whether or not you arrive at different times or different modes of transportation is irrelevant for the guidance. But it does allow you to operate in pods up to 6.
Could you clarify what non-seated versus seated events are in a large venue holding over 500 people?
Yeah, isn't that funny language that we use? It's, I'm sorry, it's either it's exclusively seated, and that means that your participants are remaining seated. It's not a kind of a mixed movement situation, or you're standing for the entire, so the non-seated really means standing or moving around. So for example, a bowling alley or an arcade, or I don't know, a festival. Those are all non-seated movement events. But if it is defined as a seated venue, and that's outlined in our guidance, that the patrons remain seated, and that's why you get the higher capacity.
For community events that are all outdoors, can they move forward?
Mhm. Yes. And for those venues that don't have a defined occupancy, there is a calculation and a way to, there are instructions and a way to calculate your occupancy for those. You basically measure the square footage and divide by 113. And that's been available to venues all along.
What are the specific requirements for food service at venues larger than 500 people, specifically for banquet style events?
I might ask for help backing me up on this one, but if you're operating like a restaurant, then you follow the food service requirements in the restaurant guidance. If you aren't following those, there are food service requirements in the entertainment guidance. We still are requiring table sizes of 6 and of course masking.
Is there any guidance for festivals and fairs as of now or a date that there will be? We understand that they aren't happening for a few months, but planning needs to happen now.
And I agree. And we want everyone to proceed with planning as we all hope for a better day shortly. So you would use the outdoor entertainment guidance. And for festivals, that's going to be a non-seated or standing event. Those events will be allowed up to 10,000 people operating at 15% of capacity. So for a really large festival where there's quite a bit of acreage, you're going to be, and assuming it's less than 15%, you're going to be able to have up to 10,000 people at that event. Please note that for events and outdoor entertainment, we are requiring masking. You know, this is a major expansion from 250 up to 10,000. The variant is very much present in our state, so we want to start out as carefully as possible to prevent rapid spread at an event like that.
Under this guidance, are you saying a standing room concert venue could be open, but could not have any food or beverage?
You can have, you definitely can have food or beverage if you like. That if it's a standing event and there's food and beverage, that you have to have seating so that if people decide to eat or drink there, they can do so in a seated way. But if you're calling it a standing event, then your capacity is going to be lower than if it were a seated event. The reason, just to very quickly reiterate, the reason we have different capacities and allowances for outside and inside, standing and seated, is that they present different risk profiles. So you have the most flexibility in an outdoor seated event, and then it gets moderated from there. And this is all designed to as a safety strategy to mitigate risk.
This next question is in reference to the Minneapolis Convention Center. If they can fit separate groups of 1,500 in many spaces with separate entrances and exits, can they host multiple groups at the same time?
We're going to hold off on answering that question right now, but within the next day or two, we will have posted answers for those more complex set of questions where there's multiple events at one venue.
Okay, so a little more follow-up there.
Shortly, very shortly.
Okay, good. Is a conversation taking place that has a general session seated, meals seated, and breakouts seated, but the guests are moving around these? Is that considered seated or non-seated?
You know, I would have to see the precise plan on that. We do define a seated event in the guidance. And, you know, ultimately, these plans are yours and we don't review or approve them. So we do encourage you to read the detail in the guidance, and we do define what is a standing and what is a seated.
This next question is in reference to vaccines. We are a nonprofit organization that has an event center. 99% of the food servers and bussers are volunteers. Do they qualify for the vaccine at this time?
That's an answer for someone else.
We'll take that question back and get back to you. I don't want to give an answer that's incorrect. I want to check with our vaccine people on that.
Okay, so Becky, we'll follow up with you there. Could you explain the reasoning for only having 6 people at a table at a restaurant and not expanding it to a larger number, but 15 in a home?
Yes, I can do that.
Oh, great, Dan. Go ahead.
Sure. So we just know that our just restaurants and bars continue to be a more risky setting. There's more socialization that goes on there. We have not had that many outbreaks at household events, and so it's just really based upon that. While we continue to open up, we continue to do it in a measured way so that we can be as successful as possible. But it is
I
really
would
just
also
following our
add,
data.
that's great. I would also add that in an ironic way, there's more flexibility in the table of 6. You may disagree with me, but you can have multiple households at a table of 6. In fact, you could have as many, I suppose, as 6 households. But in the home, you still are required to maintain 6 feet of social distancing between the different households that are in the home.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, Pat, it's a good question. And we know that this is an issue for restaurants. We know that booking larger tables is a new commercial opportunity. With holidays like Easter coming up, this is important to you. So we'll continue to evaluate it. I think at this stage, it's the prudent step, but we're very, very aware of the commercial argument here. And the opportunity to book larger parties is a big deal during holiday season. So thanks for raising it here.
Great. The next question is, are you allowed to attend an outdoor festival without a mask?
No.
Can an indoor event hosting a social event for dinner with a seated meal then have dancing after the meal service?
Oh, yeah. You'll just have to decide how you're characterizing that event. So that you've just described essentially a wedding. So that would be considered a standing event. But if the room changes, we'll have to go into more detail in the guidance that's going to be published in the next day or 2.
Thanks, Laura. That's all the questions that we have in the chat right now. If you do have other questions, if you could type them in, that would be great. I did just want to also point out that I have popped links for both the capacity calculator and the employer vaccine toolkit into the chat as well.
You know, as we're waiting for any additional questions, I would add the following. This is really exciting in that we are expanding. And as the governor has said repeatedly, we're looking to a very hopeful future, especially as we continue to vaccinate. We have retained certain limitations, and that is largely because of the variant that's very much in the state, the B117. The attack rate on that variant is very high, meaning if someone is contagious in that environment, it will spread at a much higher rate than previous spread in previous cases. So we've been asked questions like, why did we keep the table of 6, or why are we limiting the gym class size to 25? And that's why, as we're opening up and looking to expand, we're very hopeful for the future and hope to continue to reduce these careful restrictions. But for this initial phase, that's why we've kept those in.
Thanks. And we're getting a couple additional questions in here. Community events such as parades, fireworks, where the ground is the seating, is that enough for seated eating and drinking options?
I don't know if Kim Carlson is on, who does that regulation, or if Ben knows.
I'm going to add real quick. We can address that right now. With regards to parades, these events they're a little bit more complicated than a traditional venue. So there are going to be some additional guidance points that we're probably going to be putting out there in the upcoming weeks to address kind of those parades and those community events where it's really difficult to kind of cordon off a venue or an area in order to kind of control the number of people that are there. So that'll hopefully be forthcoming.
And what about seating on the ground?
Yeah, so one of the distinctions about a seated event is in order to classify yourself as a seated event, everybody attending the event needs to have a designated spot where they are seated. It's just not kind of a come in and grab a chair somewhere. So if you want to quantify yourself as a seated event or venue, everybody needs to have a designated place to sit. So if you imagine a stadium, your ticket is going to tell you what your seated or what your seating area is. CHS Field last year certainly accomplished this model when they kind of designated circles on the field. And when you went to the event, you were kind of pointed or designated the circle that you were going to be seated in. And that would certainly quantify a venue to being able to host a seated event and follow those requirements.
This is
Great.
Brent Foerster with Meet Minneapolis. Can I do a follow-up to that? Because it answers, I think, for a lot of us. So those of us that are doing large spaces for convention and meetings, do we literally have to number each of our chairs, which aren't traditionally numbered? Or could we do, say, a round of 3 chairs, so that's social distance, number the table, with the understanding the individuals would pick a chair from 1 of 3 from that table, and then that would be their seat throughout, was as long as that was clearly communicated and enforced, versus having to number every chair.
I think it'd be helpful, Brent, for us probably to follow up with you on that question, because there are certainly some additional considerations as we work through a lot of these real complicated, complex situations like conventions and all of that stuff. So if it's okay, could we follow up?
That would be great, because we're going to have like tables and we can designate an area and push into that, but it might be hard to like number each banquet chair that's already social distance. But yes, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. We do have a couple more questions here that we'll get through quickly. For larger hotels that have multiple event spaces, are they considered seated or non-seated?
So that's going to be detailed in the guidance that'll come out in the next day or two. And, you know, a part of that answer will depend upon the nature of the event. But we will address that and certainly contemplate places like convention centers and hotels that operate multiple events at the same time.
Great. And seems like we have time for one more question here. When will the next evaluation for additional increased capacities take place? If we continue to see low numbers of cases and high vaccination rates, would we get more capacity by this summer?
Well, we'll give the last word to the commissioner.
Thanks, Laura. Boy, I sure hope so. Don't you? I mean, I think we all do. And I think the governor does as well. We're optimistic more than we have been before. Laura and Dan rightfully mentioned the variants, which we're tracking. But man, we all will welcome the day when we're not talking about chair numbering and circles on a grass field and 6 feet of distance around us and all these sorts of things. They're such social engineering that has really gotten us through the pandemic and has kept us safe. But man, we want to put them behind us. And that's really, I think, maybe the note we should end on. If we can get this next phase right, if we can make these dial forwards and keep Minnesotans safe, as you all have done so much to do over the last year, this is just a huge opportunity for us. We're excited about the large venue component, and we want your feedback. Everybody in this call is invited to a whole host of roundtables that we hold. We want to keep hearing how this is going, what's working, what's not. So we did this as a quick shot sort of response to the Friday announcement to take some of your questions on the details, but we'll continue to engage in our roundtables too on questions and reach out directly too if you have more specific questions for your venue. We want to make sure we get this right, and are just very grateful for all the work that you've done to help us make the best decisions we possibly can for the state at a difficult time. So thanks for joining this webinar. We'll be back again soon, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining, everyone, and thanks for your flexibility today.